They didn't call. I took the picture down. This morning, I turned 78, and no one remembered. Not a call, not a message, not even a lazy group text with a balloon emoji and an afterthought of love. I waited. I admit it. I boiled the kettle slower than usual, let the toast burn just slightly, thinking maybe the phone would buzz while I buttered it. I even changed the hand towel in the guest bathroom, the one no one uses anymore, like somehow fresh linen might summon company. But the silence was unbroken. It clung to the walls like old wallpaper peeling, yellowed, and impossible to ignore. I sat on the edge of the couch, the one with the indent still shaped like Mark's frame from the time he napped there after Emily's recital. That was 6 years ago, before their visits became excuses, before I stopped asking when they'd come again. My eyes drifted upward to the picture, the family portrait above the mantel, all of them smiling, too wide, too forced, Anna's lipstick too red, her husband already checking his watch, Jake holding his soccer ball like a trophy, Emily in that recital dress I sewed the hem on, and me, center frame, like a museum relic, important enough to display, not important enough to dust. I remember the day we took it. I had begged them, not asked it, begged. There had been lemon cookies on the tray, still warm. Not a single one was touched. The photographer, a nervous boy from down the street, said smile. 3 times before anyone listened. Anna rolled her eyes. Mark muttered something about traffic, but we got the shot, and I held on to that photograph like it meant something, like it meant they saw me. I see now that it meant nothing to them, only to me. When the mail came, I still hoped, maybe a card, maybe one of those silly singing ones the kids used to pick out. Instead, an electricity bill, due date circled in red, as if I needed reminding that the world only notices when you forget to pay. I didn't cry. I haven't cried in years. Not since James passed, not since they told me I should downsize and give the house to Anna before taxes made it messy. Not since I signed over the title and they stopped calling entirely. I didn't cry. I stood, walked to the fireplace, and I reached for the frame. It was heavier than I remembered. My fingers slipped a little against the glass, dust clinging to my skin like guilt. I stared into the frozen smiles, and something inside me, quiet and old and patient, finally whispered, enough. I carried the picture to the hallway closet, past the wrapping paper rolls no one uses, past the drawer of birthday candles with numbers I no longer need. I placed the frame behind the gift bags. It didn't deserve the front. Then I shut the door, not with anger, not with drama, just with the kind of finality that comes when you've been erased 1 year at a time. The wall above the mantel is empty now. A pale rectangle remains, the outline of a life once deemed photo-worthy, but somehow, that bare space feels truer than the image ever did, honest in a way the portrait never was. They didn't call, and I won't remind them I exist. I sat down with a cup of chamomile tea, steam rising like a ghost. The taste was flat, but it was mine. I watched the light crawl across the floorboards and thought about all the times I'd made room for Thema in my house, in my plans, in my heart. Maybe it's time I made room for something else. Routine as armor. After I tucked the portrait away, I didn't sit long. I couldn't. Stillness has a way of making old thoughts louder, and mine were starting to echo. So I got up and began moving through the house. My house, though sometimes it didn't feel like mine anymore. The kettle still sat warm on the stove, the second steep of chamomile now gone weak. I poured it down the sink and washed the cup by hand, as I always did. Not because the dishwasher didn't work it does, but because old habits are harder to part with than children. The sun had risen higher, throwing pale light across the kitchen floor. I wiped down the counter, although it was already clean, straightened the calendar on the wall, the one with Emily's school photo clipped to the corner, 3rd grade, missing her front tooth. She's 15 now. I haven't seen her in nearly a year. I opened the refrigerator, stared at the shelves, closed it again. Not hungry. I wandered into the hallway, picking up a lone sock that had slipped from the laundry basket days ago. I set it on top like it belonged. Then, like I did every morning, I made my way to the guest bathroom. I don't know why I kept that bathroom so ready. The towels always freshly laundered, the little soaps replaced before they dulled. I even bought new hand lotion last week, lavender and rose. No one ever used it, but I like to imagine someone might. That maybe, one day, Jake would stop by after practice, or Anna would need a break from the kids and crash here for the weekend. I fluffed the hand towel again anyway, straightened it on the rack like I used to straighten their collars when they were small. Then the phone rang. For a moment, my heart jumped. I nearly dropped the hand towel. I wiped my hands and hurried into the kitchen. The phone still has a cord, an old habit I never gave up. I picked it up, breath held just a little tighter than usual. It was Anna. "Hi, Mom," she said, voice light. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No," I replied, my voice soft. "Not at all." She didn't ask how I was, didn't pause, just launched in. "Emily has rehearsals this weekend." "That school play? Remember I mentioned it?" She didn't wait for me to answer. "Anyway, we're juggling everything. Jake's got a tournament. Tom's traveling again." Total chaos. I smiled a little. "The kind you wear so they don't hear the ache in your throat." "I see," I said. "I was wondering if you could come watch Emily for a few hours on Saturday, just till we get back." "I know it's last minute." She didn't mention the day before. "My birthday." "Not a word." "Actually," I said, gently, "I have plans." There was a silence. Not long, but long enough. "You have plans?" she repeated, confused, as if the concept itself didn't quite fit. "I do," I said again. I didn't explain. I didn't rush to fill the quiet like I usually do. Anna let out a soft breath, like she was trying not to sound impatient. "Oh, okay, I just thought, oh well, you're usually free." "Never mind." I could almost hear her shrugging through the phone. "I hope everything's all right," she added, but it sounded more like habit than concern. "It is," I said. "I just needed the day." "Well, a broken bar. Okay then, I'll figure something out." "All right, goodbye, Anna." "Bye, Mom." I set the receiver down gently. The dial tone hummed for a second before I hung it up, and there it was, the first no I'd given in years. It didn't shake the walls, it didn't even echo, but it stayed with me, warm and solid like a stone in the palm. She hadn't asked why, hadn't even paused long enough to wonder what those plans might be. She didn't think I had a life, because somewhere along the way, I stopped having one. I became the fallback, the yes man in slippers, the woman who never left her kettle cold. I stared at the cordless phone, then at the window. Outside, the neighbor's cat jumped from fence to fence, graceful and unbothered. The sky was pale blue, washed clean from last night's rain. Everything looked the same, but something had shifted. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was tired. Tired of being expected, tired of being available, tired of being invisible unless needed. And for the first time in a very long while, I said number, quietly, calmly, like a woman who's just remembered she has a choice. Quiet erasure. It's a strange thing to disappear without ever leaving the room, to sit at a table you bought, surrounded by chairs you once polished before every holiday, and feel like a ghost in your own home. But that's what it is. This slow fading, not cruel, just consistent. It began, I suppose, with the meals. There was a time when they asked for my pot roast, my chicken dumplings, my green beans cooked just long enough to taste like childhood. There were recipes written in smudged ink, stories told while we chopped carrots, and laughter that spilled over like gravy from an overfull plate. But then came the changes. Jake became pescatarian. Emily said she was cutting carbs. Anna brought her own salad dressing in glass jars and sniffed when I offered ranch. "We're trying to be more conscious," she said once, with a tight smile and tighter jeans. I stopped making the dumplings, stopped simmering the gravy. They still came, at first, not as often, and never unannounced, but enough to leave traces of fingerprints on the glass, damp towels left in the hall bath, the occasional coffee mug forgotten on the windowsill. Then those visits thinned out too. Now, the kitchen holds fewer smells. The oven cools more often than not. I still make toast in the morning, tea in the afternoon, sometimes soup if the weather calls for it, always for one, never for more. There's a rhythm to solitude. I measure it in teaspoons and folded laundry. I dust on Thursdays, Water the plants every Monday. I write out grocery lists even when I don't need much. A habit is a stubborn friend, and I wait, not for anything dramatic, just for signs. I check the mailbox with more hope than I admit, not for bills, not for ads, but for something personal, a card, a note, a photo, anything with ink that says, I remembered. Last week, I received a flyer for lawn care. The man on the cover looked friendly, like he might call me ma'am and ask if I needed help carrying the groceries. I almost called the number, just to hear someone answer kindly. The phone rings less now, and when it does, it's never a conversation, it's logistics. Can you babysit? Can you pick this up? Can you be home to let the plumber in? Once, Mark called and said, sorry, but dial. He didn't hang up right away, so I listened for a moment. He was laughing with someone, a coworker, I think. I wanted to hear more, wanted to feel part of something, even by accident. But then he realized, and the line went dead. Sometimes, I reread old text messages, and not because I'm nostalgic, but because I want to remember what it felt like to matter. The messages now are short, functional, fragments of coordination. Running late. Next week better? Sorry, a crazy day. They think kindness is spelled with emojis and typed with one thumb. There's a drawer in my kitchen, the second one, beside the sink. It used to hold lunch notes, the kind I'd tuck into Mark's backpack. A heart, a smiley face. You've got this. He kept some of them. I found them once, years ago, in an old shoebox in his closet. Now the drawer holds coupons I don't use and rubber bands I've kept for no reason. That's what this is, I think. A life of rubber bands, so useful, stretched, then forgotten. They haven't said anything cruel, not really. But silence cuts too, especially the polite kind. The kind that sounds like, we'll try to come by soon, or, hope everything's good on your end. As if I were a distant relative. Not the woman who once held their fevers, who stayed awake when they were late, who held their trembling shoulders after first breakups and job rejections. They used to need me. Now they just expect me. There's a difference. Last week, I made a pie, just because. Apple, my favorite. The crust was golden and soft. I ate one slice. The rest sat on the counter, then went into the fridge, then the trash. Not because it was bad, because no one came. Sometimes I find myself talking aloud, to James, to the cat, to no one. Not full conversations, just murmurs, a thought, a memory, a name. I said Emily the other day while folding towels, just her name, nothing more, and it made me ache. Not because she isn't here, but because she used to be. They used to fill this house. Now it's just me, and the kettle, and the portrait. No. Not anymore. Now there's just the wall, bare and honest. And maybe that's better. Maybe. Flashback, effort and erosion. I wasn't always this quiet. There was a time my name rang through this house like a bell, called from bedrooms, shouted over backyard fences, whispered in kitchens where cookies cooled and knees bled and secrets were kept safe inside flower jars. I remember one day so clearly. It was Jake's 9th birthday. We didn't have much that year. James had been laid off, and I was picking up night shifts at the clinic. But I saved for weeks, clipped coupons, skipped the good coffee, wore the same 2 dresses on rotation so I could stretch the grocery budget just far enough. Jake wanted a pirate party. Not some store-bought theme with paper plates and noisemakers, but the real thing like in the books, he said. So I stayed up 3 nights sewing little felt eye patches and gluing gold coins to an old jewelry box. I hand-painted a treasure map across a roll of butcher paper, hid clues under the rose bushes and in the mailbox, and baked a chocolate cake shaped like a ship. The morning of the party, it poured rain. I thought it would ruin everything. But when Jake opened the door and saw the living room as streamers like sails, the couch turned into a ship's hull. Emily in a striped scarf yelling, "I." He screamed with joy. He ran to me, arms flung wide, and said, "This is better than real pirates, Grandma." Later that afternoon, when the parents came to pick up their kids, one mother paused by the door. She looked around, at the cake crumbs and the balloon animals and the homemade banners, and said, You really went all out." I smiled, not sheepishly, not apologetically, just proud, because I had, and it mattered. Even Marcus, stoic, always distracted, pulled me aside as he collected wrapping paper and whispered, "Thanks, Mom. He'll remember this." And he did. For a while, years later, he brought it up at Thanksgiving. We were all in the kitchen, elbows bumping, the radio low. Jake had started college by then. Emily was glued to her phone. But Mark said, out of nowhere, "Remember that pirate party? She made the whole backyard into an island." He looked at me and grinned. "You really were something else." That moment it sparkled. It's not the big milestones I miss, not the graduations or weddings or the loud holidays with folding chairs and too much gravy. It's the moments when I was part of the fabric, when my presence wasn't an accommodation, but a contribution, when they needed me not because I was free, or available, or cheap help, but because I was me. There was a time Anna called me every other morning, just to check in. There was a time Emily drew me pictures of our tea parties, when her crayon fingers still couldn't spell grammar right. There was a time Jake sat in my lap and told me he wanted to be a hug doctor so he could make people feel better with arms instead of medicine. Those were loud years, messy years, the good kind. I was tired often. I stretched every dollar. I cried in the laundry room when no one could hear. But I was seen, not perfectly, not always, but I was in their world, fully, and slowly, like water finding the cracks. That inclusion became convenience, that presence became expected, then taken for granted, then background. I suppose I didn't notice when it changed. Not at first. It's like when fall creeps in, one leaf, then another. The trees still look full, until suddenly they don't, and you realize it's not summer anymore yet and hasn't been for some time. Now when I sit in this house, what echoes isn't laughter, it's the absence of it. I still keep the eye patches in a drawer somewhere. The treasure map, yellowing at the edges, is folded neatly beside the sewing box. I haven't touched them in years, but I don't throw them out. I suppose that's the part of me that still hopes, or maybe just remembers, because once, I was the island, the captain, the crew. Now, I'm the empty deck, but I remember. And memory, it seems, is where I'm most alive. The final shift, hope, is a peculiar thing. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It creeps in, like morning light through old curtains, soft, unannounced. That's how it felt when I opened the mailbox that afternoon. I hadn't planned to check it just then. I was halfway through folding towels, but something nudged me, and I walked to the door, slipped on my shoes, and stepped into the crisp air. The sun had already begun its slow descent. The shadows were long, the kind that make everything look more delicate. I opened the mailbox with the same motion I'd done for decades. Bills, catalogs, advertisements. But that day, I saw an envelope, a plain white envelope, tucked between a gardening flyer and the gas company notice. For a brief second, just a flicker, I felt it. Maybe someone remembered. Maybe Anna, late but trying, or one of the grandchildren, guided by guilt or kindness. Maybe Emily had drawn something again, like she used to. I held the envelope gently, like it might hold breath itself. It was thin. I turned it over. No return address in handwriting, just the machine-stamped corner of the electric company. Inside, a balance due and a note reminding me of paperless options. I stood by the mailbox for a long time, holding that envelope like it had betrayed me, because it had. Not by what it was, but by what it wasn't. I didn't cry, I didn't even sigh. I just went back inside, the screen door clicking behind me like punctuation. I set the envelope on the counter. I didn't tear it up, I didn't shove it in a drawer. I placed it neatly, precisely, because order is sometimes the only thing left when joy slips out the back door. And then I looked up, at the picture, still there, still smug, the family portrait above the fireplace, untouched since morning. Those frozen smiles, that curated closeness, it didn't feel like mine anymore, not really. I stared at it, long and quiet, and something in me, something deep and old and rarely stirred, said, "You don't have to keep proving you belong." I crossed the room, hands steadier than I expected, and reached up. The frame was heavier than I remembered. My fingers found the grooves, the edges worn smooth from years of careful dusting. Down it came, not with force, not with ceremony, just with resolve. I carried it to the hallway closet, past the candles from Christmases no one came for, the unused wrapping paper, the box of bows that never made it onto gifts. I slid the portrait behind them, where it wouldn't gather more dust than it already had. Then I closed the door, not with sadness, not even with anger, just with the kind of finality that tastes like chamomile and silence. When I walked back into the living room, the wall was bare, paler where the frame had shielded it from years of sun, a faint outline, the shape of something once important. It looked cleaner now, not emptier, cleaner. I stood there, letting the quiet settle like dust, letting the absence speak what the photo never could. I didn't reach for the hammer, I didn't search for something to fill the space. The wall could breathe now, and so could I. That was the moment, the quiet, invisible shift. No lightning, no dramatic music, just the stillness of realizing no one was coming, and that maybe, just maybe, I didn't need them to. Dust on her fingers, not on their memories. I sat back down in the living room, in the same old chair with the creak in the right armrest. The space above the fireplace looked hollow, but somehow honest. The portrait had been there so long, its absence felt like a draft. But I didn't fill it, I let the wall speak for itself. There was a cup of tea growing cold on the end table. I lifted it and sipped, bitter now, but I drank it anyway. The heat was gone, but the habit remained. That's the thing about Britannia, it doesn't comfort you, it contains you. For years, I've wrapped myself in the shape of usefulness. Cooked meals no one asked for, replaced light bulbs no one noticed, drove to recitals and tournaments and doctor appointments, always waiting in the background with a book I never really read. I was the spare key, the backup, the dependable fallback, and now I'm tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes. This is the tired of giving pieces of yourself away so gradually, you don't realize there's nothing left until you reach for something and your hand comes back empty. I don't want to be pitied. I don't want some grand apology wrapped in flowers and last-minute cards. I want to feel like someone would notice if I didn't answer the door, like I'm not just an emergency contact, but a person worth dialing on a good day. I look at the kitchen from where I sit. The edges are soft in the afternoon light. The floor has that faint squeak near the sink, the one James always meant to fix. I left it broken. It reminds me of him. There's a stack of notepads in the drawer by the stove. Grocery lists, appointment reminders, notes I wrote to myself in looping script. Pick up milk, Emily's birthday, call Anna about Sunday. Tasks, reminders, provisions for a life built around other people's needs. I haven't made a list for myself in years, not one. I tried to take pride in being needed, thought it made me indispensable, but it didn't. It made me invisible in a different costume, the kind that looks like gratitude, but feels like servitude. I remember once, not long after James passed, Jake called crying. He'd failed a math test. He was 10. I told him one test didn't define him, that I was proud of him anyway. He sniffled and said, "You always make it better." No one says that now. Now I'm the woman they drop casseroles off to, the one they text at the last minute when the babysitter cancels, the woman who used to matter but now keeps her stories to herself because no one asks. I haven't told anyone how often I talk to James, just in passing, just in thought. When the silence gets too loud, I say his name, quietly, into the room. It doesn't echo, it just softens the corners of the day. I wonder sometimes what he'd think, of Anna's clipped tone, of Mark's polite distance, of the way they forget I'm still here. He wouldn't stand for it, he never did. He saw me, even when I wore the same robe 3 mornings in a row, even when my hands were cracked from winter. He rubbed lotion on them, muttering something about keeping his favorite hands in working order. That's what love felt like, not fireworks, just care that didn't have to be requested. Now I scrub my own hands and avoid the mirrors because the eyes looking back are a stranger's. Tired, thin, familiar but distant. I don't want sympathy, I don't want saving, I just want to stop pretending I'm fine when all I feel is worn. There's a drawer in the bedroom with sweaters I don't wear anymore. Too itchy, too tight, too full of memories. I keep them anyway, like relics of a time when my name was spoken with warmth. Tonight, I might open that drawer and fold them neatly, one by one. Not because I'm giving them away, not yet, but because I need to touch something that once held me, even if it doesn't fit anymore. What the wall now reveals. The wall above the fireplace was still bare the next morning. I hadn't touched it. I thought I might. That maybe the emptiness would nag at me, the way a crooked painting does until you have to straighten it. But I stood there in my slippers, tea cooling in one hand, and looked at that pale rectangle where the photo had hung for nearly a decade. It didn't bother me. If anything, it felt like the first honest space in the house. I hadn't realized how much energy I'd spent polishing a lie. That picturea so carefully placed, so often straightened, had become a kind of shrine, not to family, but to the idea of family, to the myth that we were still close, still tethered, still something whole. And now it was gone, and what remained was not absence, it was clarity. I sat down on the couch, still in my robe, the light just beginning to stretch across the carpet. I took a sip of tea. It was too cool now, slightly bitter. I drank it anyway. Outside, the street was quiet. Mrs. Lowry's porch light still glowed across the way. She always forgets to turn it off, and it occurred to me, I had built my days around being remembered. Every little gesture, cleaning the guest room, making extra soup, keeping the calendar up to date, wasn't just habit. It was a beacon, a quiet signal sent out into the dark, hoping someone would notice. But no one had, not really, and I was so tired of sending signals that never got answered. I looked at the wall again, that rectangle where the sun had never touched the paint. The frame had shielded it all these years, like I had shielded the truth, that they forgot, that they didn't check in because they didn't need to, that I had become more useful than loved. I set the tea down. My fingers brushed against the hem of my robe, thin, faded from years of washes, still soft. I remembered buying it after James died. A small thing, a comfort thing, the kind of thing people don't notice, but you live inside. That morning, I realized something simple, unshakable. If no one was coming, a broken bar. If the phone would keep its silence, a broken bar. If the mailbox would only ever offer bills and catalogs, a broken bar. Then I had a choice. I could either keep playing the part of filling the rooms with reminders of people who had already left emotionally, or I could stop. Not out of bitterness, not even sadness, but out of self-respect. There is something solemn and sacred about admitting a truth you've spent years avoiding. It doesn't come like thunder, it comes like breath, like standing in front of a blank wall and not needing to decorate it. Not today, not anymore. And I knew, in that still room, something had to shift. Not them, me. I didn't know how yet, or when, or what shape it would take, but I knew I would not keep orbiting people who no longer felt the pull. Let them call it distance, let them call it space. I would call it peace, because sometimes, the first step isn't walking away, it's deciding you're done waiting for the door to open. The first no. The phone rang the next day. I almost didn't answer. Something about the way it chirped made me think it would be a dentist's reminder or another recorded message asking about my car's non-existent warranty. But it was Anna. "Hi, Mom," she said, the way people do when they need something but haven't rehearsed how to ask. "Hello, Anna." There was a pause, not long, just enough to let me hear her thinking. "Emily has rehearsals tonight. It's Tech Week, you know how that goes, and Jake's game got rescheduled. Tom's at a conference in Denver. I'm juggling everything." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't mention yesterday, or the day before that. Then came the ask, as smooth and predictable as always. "Would you mind coming by for a few hours, just until bedtime?" She really wants Grandma. That last part, she said like sugar on top, as if remembering I had a heart would make up for forgetting I had a birthday. I didn't hesitate. "I have plans," I said, evenly. There was silence on the line, a surprised breath. She hadn't expected that. "I never said number." "Oh," she said slowly, like the word didn't fit in her mouth. "I didn't realize." "I know," I replied. I didn't add anything else. I didn't fill the space with guilt or explanation. "Well, I guess I'll figure something out," she said. "I'm sure you will." We said our goodbyes, and I set the phone back in its cradle. Then I stood very still. I hadn't lied. Exactly. I did have plans. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out the good tote bag, the navy one with the leather straps, the one I'd bought for trips I never ended up taking. I filled it carefully. A book I'd been meaning to read for 2 years. The one with the cracked spine and ribbon bookmark still stuck in chapter 3, a thermos of tea, my knitting needles and the pale blue yarn I once bought to make a blanket for no one in particular, and I left the house. Not for anywhere dramatic, not to make a point, I just walked 3 blocks to the park with the duck pond and the benches under the old birch trees. The air was warm, but not hot. The wind had that early spring scent of turned soil and something green waking up. I sat on a bench facing the water, pulled out the book, opened it. I didn't check my phone, didn't wonder if Anna called back, didn't picture the empty guest room or the wall above the mantel. I read. For 2 hours, I was just a woman on a bench with a book and tea and the quiet company of ducks. No one needed me, and it felt a broken bar, peaceful, not lonely, still, whole. I watched the shadows stretch as the sun began its slow descent. Children squealed from the playground, and somewhere behind me, someone played soft music on a Bluetooth speaker. I didn't want to go home just yet, so I opened the knitting bag. The yarn slipped between my fingers like memory. I cast on the first few stitches, slow and deliberate, each loop a small reclamation. This wasn't a gift, not a favor, not a symbol. It was mine. I wasn't making something for anyone else, just for the comfort of making something. When I finally stood to leave, the thermos was empty, and my shoulders felt lighter. I didn't rush home, because for the first time in longer than I could remember, no one was waiting, and somehow, that wasn't a sorrow, it was freedom. No more fixing, no more waiting. That evening, the house felt different, not because it looked different. Everything was where I left it. The cushions fluffed, the floor swept, the dish towel hanging just so on the oven handle. But something in the air had shifted, or maybe just something in me. I changed into my softest sweater, the gray one with the frayed sleeve. No visitors were coming, no one to impress, just warmth for warmth's sake. I made a cup of tea, a chamomile again, but stronger this time. Let the bag steep too long on purpose. I liked it that way. Bitterness doesn't frighten me anymore. I carried the mug to the dining table, where the pad of paper sat waiting. Not the shopping list, not the appointments, not reminders for other people's needs, just a notebook I hadn't touched in years. The one I used to jot down ideas, thoughts, lines from poems that never quite left me. Tonight, I opened it, and I made 3 columns, neatly, like I was balancing a checkbook. What I gave, what I got, what ends today. Under what I gave, I wrote without pause. Time I wasn't asked for, money I didn't mention, babysitting when I should have been resting, holidays alone, so they could go on trips, every birthday remembered, even when mine wasn't, forgiveness, over and over, a home that stayed open, even when the door wasn't knocked on. I stared at the list for a moment, then moved to what I got. That one took longer. I wrote, "Thanks, Grandma." Silence. A group text. "Sorry, just busy." More silence. I stopped after 5. I didn't need to keep going. The imbalance was too heavy to ignore. And finally, I wrote under the last column, "What ends today?" The ink moved slower now, like it understood the gravity of what it carried. Waiting for apologies, expecting calls that don't come, baking just in case, leaving the light on, dusting the empty chair, making room where I'm not invited, shrinking myself to fit their comfort. I sat back in the chair and read it all once, not with anger, with certainty. Then I tore out that last page, just that one, folded it. Not carefully, not like something to keep. I walked it to the fireplace and lit the corner with a match. Watched the flame curl the paper, devour the ink, the words blackening, then turning to soft gray ash that floated up the chimney without sound. It was the only ceremony I needed. After, I washed the cup and put it away, not because I was expecting someone else to use it tomorrow, but because I like a clean kitchen before bed. I turned off the lights, one by one. As I moved through the rooms, the hallway was quiet. The couch still held the shape of my afternoon reading. The bare wall above the mantel met my gaze again. That empty space didn't ask for filling. It stood there, steady. True. I climbed into bed and left the phone on the table, not on the pillow, not by my side. I didn't need to check it. And in the dark, I breathed, not waiting, just being, not hopeful, just whole. And in that final gesture, paper to ash, frame to closet, silence over Replia, I wasn't asking to be seen anymore. I was choosing to see myself. The wall stays bare. The morning after, the light came in slow, the way it always does in late spring, a golden, reluctant, and kind. I woke without an alarm, no schedule, no list, no one expecting me, and for the first time in a long while, that didn't feel like a failure. It felt like permission. I moved through the house differently, not faster, not slower, just present. The kettle hissed its usual greeting. I filled my mug with a new tea, a mint. Today, something I hadn't had in years. James used to drink it before bed. I used to wrinkle my nose at the smell. Now, it made me smile. Funny how things return when you stop waiting for them. I sat in my chair, the one with the faded cushion and the blanket folded over the arm. The portrait wasn't on the wall, the blank space still there, still pale, still waiting to be noticed. I let it be. The wall didn't accuse me, it didn't whisper of loss, it simply was a record of something removed, a statement in negative space. And me? I felt no need to fill it. That's the thing no one tells you about PCA. It's not loud. It doesn't come with music or medals or some thunderous realization. It comes like a gentle hand on your back, reminding you that you're still here, that being still is not the same as being stuck. There was a soft knock on the door around noon, not frantic, not urgent, just a gentle tap. I opened it to see Mrs. Lowry standing there, casserole dish in hand, steam fogging the glass lid. "I saw your light last night," she said. "Just thought maybe you could use something warm." I blinked, not because I was surprised, but because I hadn't realized anyone saw the light. I thought I'd gone invisible. I stepped aside and smiled. "Thank you," I said. "That's very kind." She placed the dish on the counter, her eyes soft, searching. "You ever want company?" she said, brushing her hands on her coat. "Just knock." I nodded. She didn't linger. She didn't ask questions. She just left a warmth behind, a more than what came from the dish. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I just stood there for a moment, hand resting on the countertop, and let myself feel seen. Not entirely, not dramatically, just enough. I ate lunch at the table that day, not in front of the television, not on the edge of the couch with a lap tray, but properly, like someone worth setting a place for. Afterward, I opened the window, let the air in. I read, I knitted. I didn't check my phone, and when the sky turned dusky pink and the world slowed again, I lit a candle, not for anyone else, not in memory, not in mourning, just because I like the scent of vanilla. That night, before bed, I passed the living room again. The wall was still bare, still beautiful in its honesty. I didn't reach for a hammer. I didn't open the closet. I let the space be, not empty, not abandoned, just true. And I understood then. I was never the portrait. I was never the frame. I was the wall. I held them all. And I still stood, even when they forgot. But now, I no longer needed to hold what wouldn't return the weight. That is not sadness. That is sovereignty. That is strength. That is mine.